What if I told you that climate change isn't just about melting ice caps and rising temperatures, but that it's fueling wars, forcing millions to flee their homes, and reshaping global power struggles?
You've heard about global warming and climate change.
It's global temperatures, okay? And it's going up.
UN scientists have given their final warning on how to save the planet from the climate crisis.
Imagine this. A river that once sustained entire civilizations is now drying up, sparking conflicts between nations, fighting for the last drops of water. Countries that once relied on oil for dominance are now scrambling for control over lithium and rare earth metals. Meanwhile, rising sea levels are swallowing islands whole, forcing governments to redraw their borders in real time. This isn't the plot of a Hollywood movie. This is happening right now in front of so many people, yet no one is talking about it. Why? And what does this mean for the future of global stability? Let's break it down. So, after some deep research, I have put down the reasons into 5 major points on why climate change is not only a people's crisis, but also a major point of conflict between some global political powers. One of the first reasons are resource shortage and competition. Some of the biggest ways climate change impacts geopolitics is by creating shortage of vital resources that leads tensions between nations, like water and food security. Droughts, floods, and unpredictable weather patterns are reducing water availability and harming agriculture. This leads to competition over essential resources. A prime example is the growing disputes over water in the Middle East and Asia. Countries like India, China, and Pakistan are seeing rising tensions over river flows and dam constructions that restrict water supply downstream. Arctic competition. The Arctic is another hotspot. As ice caps melt, new shipping routes and untapped resources like oil and gas become accessible. This has sparked territorial disputes between Arctic nations, including Russia, Canada, and the US. We're seeing an emerging Cold War, not just over ideology, but over melting ice, and who gets to control the newly exposed riches. Agricultural impact. In sub-Saharan Africa and parts of South Asia, the decline in crop yields is pushing farmers into poverty, increasing food insecurity, and creating unrest that spills across borders. The second point is migration and instability. Climate disasters are forcing millions to leave their homes, creating both humanitarian crises and political instability. Examples: Central America. Extreme weather events, like hurricanes and prolonged droughts, have pushed thousands to migrate north toward the US. This surge in climate refugees strains border control policies and ignites political debates on immigration. In Africa, desertification is making land uninhabitable, fueling migration toward Europe. This influx has already contributed to political instability in the EU, influencing elections and policies on border security. The more frequent and intense these disasters become, the more we'll see climate-driven migration reshape global politics, which leads to our third point: climate change and armed conflicts. Over the past century, studies show that climate change has influenced between 3% and 20% of all armed conflicts. And projections are even more alarming. If global temperatures rise by 4 degrees Celsius, the risk of conflict could increase by 5 times. But how exactly does climate stress lead to violence? In regions that are already fragile, like the Sahel in Africa or conflict-prone parts of the Middle East, rising temperatures and extreme weather events are making access to essential resources like water and food even more difficult. One widely cited example is Syria. Back in 2006 to 2010, the country experienced a severe and prolonged drought. Farmland dried up, livestock died, and millions were affected. This environmental crisis led to large-scale internal migration, as rural populations moved into cities in search of work and resources. The result? Overcrowding, rising unemployment, and growing social tensions, conditions that contributed to the outbreak of civil war in 2011. In many of these situations, instability opens the door for armed groups to grow. As economic and social systems collapse under climate stress, some communities, especially young people, may turn to militias or rebel organizations offering food, security, or a sense of structure and belonging. It's important to note that climate change isn't a direct cause of war, but it acts as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing political, social, and economic problems, and increasing the chances that they erupt into violence. In short, As the planet continues to warm, we're likely to see more regions pushed toward conflict, not because of climate alone, but because of the pressure it adds to an already fragile world. And that brings us to our fourth crucial point: the energy transition and new geopolitical rivalries. As the world tries to move away from fossil fuels, a new kind of resource war is taking shape. Not over oil, but over the metals that make clean energy possible. We're talking about lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, the lifeblood of electric car batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. But here's the catch: these minerals aren't spread evenly across the planet. Lithium is largely concentrated in South America's Lithium Triangle: Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile. Cobalt comes mainly from the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country with a long history of exploitation and instability. And rare earth metals. China controls over 60% of the global supply chain. So while the world is rushing toward a cleaner future, it's also walking straight into a new kind of geopolitical storm. Some are already calling it the new oil war. Only this time, it's not about pipelines, it's about mines, trade routes, and tech dominance. Countries are scrambling to secure long-term mining rights, forming new alliances, and investing billions to reduce dependency on geopolitical rivals. The West, for instance, is trying to break free from China's grip on rare earth processing. Meanwhile, China is tightening its control, playing both defense and offense. And just like that, a new kind of energy vulnerability is emerging. In the 20th century, it was about who controlled the oil. In the 21st, it's about who controls the battery. Because whoever does controls the future of transportation, energy storage, and even military tech. Now, the last and the most important point: polar power struggles. The Arctic and Antarctica. As polar ice melts, the Arctic and Antarctica are becoming new battlegrounds for geopolitical influence. Climate change is making these regions more accessible, increasing tensions over territory, resources, and strategic positioning. The Arctic. As Arctic ice recedes, new shipping routes like the Northern Sea Route are opening, allowing faster trade between Europe and Asia. Countries like Russia, the US, and Canada are competing for control over these routes and the vast oil and gas reserves beneath the Arctic seabed. The Antarctic. While the Antarctic Treaty, which created in 1959, currently freezes territorial claims and prohibits militarization, major powers like the US, China, and Russia are expanding their presence through scientific research stations that double as geopolitical footholds. The US controls key stations including the South Pole and McMurdo Station. China is rapidly growing its presence, with 5 research stations and dual-use technologies like satellite systems. Russia operates stations focused on both scientific and strategic space programs. The mining ban in Antarctica is set to expire in 2048, which could trigger a global rush for untapped resources as climate change makes the region more accessible. In addition to that, as sea levels rise, low-lying island nations and coastal regions are facing existential threats. Countries like Bangladesh and small Pacific Island nations may lose large portions of land, displacing millions. This could lead to new international disputes over ocean borders, fisheries, and land ownership. So in conclusion, climate change isn't just about melting ice caps or rising temperatures. It's about power, survival, and the future of global order. From water wars to mass migration, and from energy struggles to rising geopolitical tensions, the effects of climate change are reshaping the world in ways we can't ignore. So the main question is, why isn't this a bigger conversation? Perhaps because it's complex, uncomfortable, and deeply intertwined with economic and political interests. But one thing is certain: climate change is no longer just an environmental issue. It's a global security issue that demands urgent attention. What do you think? Will countries find ways to cooperate, or are we heading toward an era of climate-driven conflicts? Let's discuss in the comments.